Welcome to the Psychology World podcast with me, Connor Whiteley, psychology student and international best-selling psychology author of over 30 psychology books, bringing you the latest psychology news, fascinating psychology topics, and more each week. If you want to learn more, then please check out connorwhiteley.net/books. And don't forget to like and subscribe to the YouTube video or follow on your favourite podcast app. And here's the show. Hi everyone and welcome to episode 234 of the Psychology World podcast with me, Connor Whiteley. And today's episode is on why are ethics needed in psychology? And it is Tuesday the 17th of October 2023 as I record this. So I'm recording this episode quite early simply because I need to get it edited, formatted and uploaded. Then I also need to upload the YouTube video before I go away on a Sunday. And because of lectures and I'm working and I'm also doing blood donation towards the end of the week, I've basically got no time at all to actually do this. So I'm recording it really early in some hope that this will actually go out, which it will, but I just need to do it really early. So today's episode is actually a lot more fun than you would imagine because I know, and I was no exception to this at all. Lots of psychology thinks ethics procedures, learning about ethics is so dull, so boring, and it's basically the worst thing that you will ever do in psychology. And I think I used to think like that, and I think if you go in with that mindset, then definitely that will be how everything ends up. But it's actually not. Ethics is actually quite interesting. The ethics procedure, at least at my university, it's really straightforward and it's actually quite fun. Especially because now I'm doing this trans research and I'm actually starting to apply for ethics for it. It's actually quite interesting and it's actually nowhere near as bad as I originally believed. And ethics is a lot more straightforward than I would have imagined, mainly because the university wants you to do research. They just want to put up some guardrails to make sure that no unethical research is actually going on. But I definitely am starting to understand more and more that ethics is not about stopping research, it's just helping safer research, which to be honest, most researchers is. But of course, you just got to be careful just in case. So you've got that to look forward to in the content part of today's episode, where we look at some tragic and some horrific examples, but they're really important to illustrate why we need ethics more than ever. So really interesting. So we're moving on to the psychology news section. So because I'm actually doing this quite early, I've not got this week's British Psychological Society Research Digest. So I managed to find one from my inbox, which I've had since about 2021. It's quite a long time, but still some interesting articles here. So the first one is, do girls really show more empathy than boys? Three people are walking down the street, two women and one man. One of the women trips and falls. Which of the two observers will feel more empathy for her pain? Hundreds of studies suggest that it will be the woman. However, these results almost overwhelmingly come from self-reports. Objective evidence that women genuinely feel more empathy than men is very thin on the ground. This has led to the idea that women report more empathy not because they actually feel it, but to conform to societal expectations that they should. However, a new study in Scientific Report claims to provide evidence that even though they think no one else is looking or asking, girls show more empathy than boys. Well, without looking at the actual research paper in any depth that I wouldn't be able to comment on the actual results. But it's the methodology that I want to focus on because this is the massive problem, and I think that the problems are twofold. One, I think if you're going to do research on self-reports, self-reports and you're actually trying to look at a behaviour, then I think that is inherently flawed. And this is why method triangulation, so using more than one method to validate and actually improve the reliability of your results, that is flat out critical. I think if you are going to do self-report measures, you've got to find another more objective research method. I get that it's not always possible, but I think you really have got to try. Because the other problem, and this connects to the first one, is social desirability bias. Because at no fault of their own, these women, because of the societal expectation, says that women are more empathetic than men, then they're going to rate themselves more. But also, the reverse is the truth for men, though, because societal expectation means that men shouldn't have more empathy, or they should be quite cold and emotionless, then they're going to score themselves lower. So I think this is a great example about why you've got to be careful in your methodology, and you've got to make sure that if you are going to do subjective stuff, you at least try and get some quantitative bits, just to help that. Because even though the study I'm doing at the moment, even though that's really heavy on qualitative, because I've just had to spend a few 10, 20 seconds to remember what the correct word is. So even though that's really heavy on the qualitative side, so the thick reach, the ascriptions, I've still got quantitative bits. Just to help back up the findings from a more objective, more scientific viewpoint though. So interesting, and I think that's one of the things that makes research rather fun. Food tastes better if you look at it before you smell it. Smell is often considered to be a particularly evocative sense. If you haven't yourself been transported back in time by a nostalgic sense, then it will almost certainly be familiar with the phenomenon via references to the famous Potin rush. Sense is also increasingly being used in marketing, with some evidence suggesting that smell can influence consumers' judgment and decisions. A new study takes a closer look at how smell interacts with other senses to influence our perceptions. The team finds that looking at food before smelling it may enhance our enjoyment of what we eat. And I actually remember this because Oxford University did such a good study that the news actually picked it up. But to my utter horror, the study wasn't anything life-saving, it wasn't anything that dramatic, it's not revolutionary. The study from Oxford University was simply the best way to eat chocolate digestives, which I admit is useful to some extent, but it's not going to save lives. It's not going to transform stuff. So, well done, Media Biased, for picking up on the least interesting story and the story that will be interesting to your viewers, but not that great overall. Okay then, so soapbox over though. Yep, so what the Oxford University study found was that if you eat the digestive chocolate side up when it first comes towards your mouth, as you can see the chocolate and get excited, then you flip it over when you eat it, just so you've got the chocolate taste first of all. So even though this is actually less about the study itself, how we see food, how we smell food, and all the sensory aspects of our food does have a massive impact on our enjoyment. And again, though, it's always that really fun, quite interesting, to be honest, flat out weird concept of psychophysics. Because how do we get these physical sensations like the smell, the sight, the food, the taste, and actually converted into psychological feelings, psychological enjoyment? So, really interesting question. Just something I have no interest in researching, but still useful to at least think about. And the final one is the editor's pick. Here's how personality changes as we age. The once popular idea that our personality becomes set like plaster by the age of 30 has been refuted by studies showing that we do change and can even purposefully change ourselves. Many studies have identified shifts in big five traits across the lifespan. However, the often inconsistent results have made for ongoing controversy about how personality typically changes with age, but a 2019 analysis of the data from 13 longitudinal studies with a total sample of more than 60,000 people from various countries have revealed some important insights. So even though I'm actually not going to go into too much depth, because I do talk about this in my book, Personality Psychology and Individual Differences, well, what I do will want to talk about is two different things, because what happened the other week is that I was working an outreach event for my university, and they made us do personality quizzes like with the students. So I did mine because I've never done them before, and this was the Myers-Briggs test. And before that outreach, then all I'd known about the Myers-Briggs was that something about my psychology lecturer saying, "Oh, it's not that accurate. It's not very scientifically valid, etc., etc." So I did it, not expecting much. I was amazed at how accurate it was, including my strengths and my weaknesses, how I am, how I think, and just stuff like that. It was scary. It was really scary accurate. I would definitely do it. The website I did was 16personalities.com. Really good, very scary. They give you quite a detailed report at the end of it, which I think I agreed with 90% of it. So it was quite good, so quite fun. Definitely do it for yourself. And when it comes to personality shifts, I definitely recommend that you actually look into it, because there are certain traits that increase in our older age, but then they also a plateau after the age of 30, and there's tons of other bits and pieces. The only one I really remember, or I remember learning about, because this explains quite a lot of stuff in my family, was how young people do tend to be more liberal, older people tend to be quite conservative, and there's a personality switch as you get older from liberal to more conservative. So I hope you enjoy the psychology news section. So let's move on to the very quick and very short personal update. So we're moving on to the personal update. So because I'm recording this so early in the week, and nothing's actually happened so far, well, I'm actually going to skip the personal update. But I really am looking forward to my work experience, and actually going up to where I'm going, engaging with service users, and actually having proper psychology work experience for the first time. So it's going to be a lot of fun, and I will report back, well, not next week, but the week after. So, as always, I always absolutely love to hear your thoughts and feelings on today's episode. So, you can always email me, connorwiley@connorwiley.net. You can always leave a comment at the show notes at connorwiley.net/podcast, and you can always tweet me on Twitter at sci-fi Wiley. I always love to hear from all of you, because it really helps make the podcast feel more like a conversation. And today's episode has been sponsored by Ethics in Psychology, a student's and professional's guide to ethical psychology research. So this is a brand new book that came out last Friday, and I actually really enjoyed it. Ethics, psychology research, not my thing. I think everyone on this podcast knows that, even though I'm basically changing my mind quite a lot in the past few weeks. But ethics, if you actually get into it, if you actually look it up, and if you see how ethics works, it can actually be a lot more fun than you would think. And some of the past experiences, which are actually going into in today's episode, is actually quite horrific. And once you know how bad some of the history has been, you actually go, "Oh right, we need this. we sort of need to enforce it. And I think that there's a lot of misconceptions about ethics, what ethics stops you doing, and ethics is sort of there to be evil, but is actually not. So I really do recommend this great, easy to understand book that is engaging. You guys know I do not write boring books. If I wanted to write boring academic, those sort of dry books, I would just never ever do it. So you can always expect an interesting, fact-based book from me that you actually want to read. Okay then, so that is Ethics in Psychology, available from all major ebook retailers, and you can get the paperback and the hardback version from Amazon, your local bookstore or local library if you request it. And you can buy the ebook directly from me at payhip.com/Con So whilst buying books helps to support the creation and the editing of the podcast, my time is sponsored by my wonderful patrons. And if you wanted to become a patron and get tons of great rewards, then you can now become one at patreon.com/the Psychology World Podcast. So let's move on to the content part of today's episode. So we're moving on to the content part of today's episode. We're going to be looking at why are ethics needed in psychology research by looking at the chapter called Examples of Unethical Research in Psychology. So this is a great chapter, really enjoyed it. Let's dive into it. To truly understand the dire need for research ethics, we need to look at some of the worst research in recent history so that we can understand what the ethical code helps to make impossible. And to be honest, even though I say these studies are some of the worst in history, back in the day and when these studies were done, this was all perfectly normal, and it was perfectly okay to do this. And it is that normality about risking people's lives, mental health, and other important aspects that we now take for granted as participants that is the most heartbreaking about this entire topic. The Tuscan egg experiment. Throughout the COVID-19 pandemic and the vaccine program, I was watching the news and they were covering the resistance or slight lack of uptake of the vaccine from ethnic minorities. The main reason the people on the news said it was because of the historical abuse of the black and other communities by the medical industry, so there was a long-standing concern and mistrust between the medical and black communities. However, there was a study mentioned during the news report that helped to explain the distrust very effectively, and that was the Tuscan experiment. This was an experiment that happened between 1932 and 1972, a 40-year-long experiment by the US Public Health Service, and during the study, they wanted to watch the natural progression of untreated syphilis on poor rural African American men. In these studies, the men were told that they were going to be receiving 3-year health care, and none of them were told that they had a syphilis, a deadly condition. Then, when treatment for the condition became available in the 1940s, these men were prevented from getting the treatment, and they weren't allowed to get treatment anywhere else in the world for the condition. All of these men were never treated for the condition. So let me quickly jump in here and just mention that the US government was perfectly happy for innocent people with a deadly condition to die just to see what would happen. Let that sink in for a moment. The results of the study showed that out of 399 participants who had the condition before the study began, 28 of them died because of the condition directly, then another 100 people died because of the related complications. In addition, 40 of the wives of the participants had become infected, as well as 19 of the children were born with congenital syphilis. As a result of the study, at least 128 died, 40 wives were infected, and I don't have the data at the moment on how many of them died, and 19 children were infected. And to be honest, who knows how many other people died or were infected. So let me be very clear here. All of these people could have been treated. No one could have died, no wife could have been infected, and no children could have been born with congenital syphilis. But the researchers running the study chose not to do that. In the end, it took a whistleblower and 6 very long years before the study was finally terminated, with the ethical issues being here that harm was caused by the researchers denying the participants medical treatment. And if you're really interested in this study, then it should be very easy to find out more on it. Personally, I don't want to read any more of it because I think this is an utter disgrace. And even with me understanding the sheer levels of racism back then, I think this is still appalling that this was even allowed to occur, and that's why ethical guidance had to be introduced, as well as it is still rather difficult to get a clear picture of what happened in any great detail, but this is probably because of the long cover-ups at the highest levels of a government. But even that is just an honest guess though. Other examples of unethical research. Come on, you seriously could not get a book on ethics in psychology without mentioning Milgram. Because I partly think Milgram was one of the main reasons, or at least one of the most influential figures, in the development of the guidelines, simply because his studies were quite horrific. No, but they weren't quite, they were horrific. And if you want to find out more about Milgram, then please check out Social Psychology, because that book also includes the differences between what was actually found in the research and what was reported. But just as a little recap, he basically got participants to believe they were electrocuting people and killing them in the end. And yes, there is a lot of research evidence in social psychology that shows there was a lot of psychological damage done to these participants. Therefore, the ethical issue in the study, and I know this really oversimplifies what he did to people, is he deceived participants to extremely unacceptable levels, and later in the book we'll talk about what is okay and what is not when it comes to deception. However, a little well known and definitely less a clear study actually comes from Elizabeth Loftus, which, as you guys know, I'm a massive fan of her. I think her research is quite impressive, and she's been really influential in how we understand memory and how it works, especially false memories. So I have a lot of respect for her work. I have no idea what she's like as a person, but as a researcher, brilliant. So what happened is that this was the case of the false memories of Jane Doe case. And if you've read my false allegation book coming out in 2024, this study was meant to pop up in there, but I decided against it because I was going to put it in here. Anyway, what happened was that there was a Jane Doe in the US that claimed that she remembered in therapy that her parents were abusing her, leading to her pressing charges, and an academic paper by another researcher was written, with Jane Doe's name never being revealed. However, Loftus and another researcher were clever enough to find out her identity. Now, I do not support what they did, and especially what I'm about to tell you, but I do appreciate the intelligence that must have taken. Or maybe it was easier than I imagined because the ethical guidelines at that time or at that moment were not so strong about the concept of anonymity. Yet, Loftus and the other researcher called Gaia believed that these were false memories, so they deceived Jane Doe and interviewed her about her recovered memories by talking to her and other people under the premise of something else. Then, when the two researchers went away, wrote a paper about Jane Doe that basically said she was a liar, and even though Jane's Doe's name was never revealed during the entire process, the victim herself did this when she sued them because of the academic article. And in the end, it turned out that Jane Doe actually had been abused, leading to the question of is it actually ethical for researchers to use information about participants without their consent in an effort to challenge their version of events? And this is even more important because this version of events actually had legal implications. In addition, this case does raise a lot of interesting questions and ethical issues. For example, does advancing our knowledge about a topic justify using a lack of informed consent on a person for research purposes, especially as Jane Doe had never given her permission for this article, as well as is it even okay that Loftus and Guy sought out her personal information when her name had purposefully been used as Jane Doe? Personally, I just don't think it was really. But as you'll see later in the book, there are times when this is perfectly okay to use participant data without consent. And this is why ethics is rather interesting, because there are so many grey areas. Finally, you will have the example of outright fabrication of data, like the examples of dodgy researchers from the replication crisis, which was where researchers found a lot of the most famous and amazing psychology studies couldn't be replicated, and the results weren't real. So what you can imagine the amount of damage this did to psychology's reputation and the issues it caused us. It even caused so much upheaval that Nobel Prize winner Daniel Kahneman, from cognitive psychology and thinking biases, to send the following email to John Barge, who was a key researcher on social priming that a lot of research has basically disproven at this point in September 2012. Open quote. As all of you know, of course, questions have been raised about the robustness of priming findings. Your field is now the poster child for doubts about the integrity of psychological research. People have now attached a question mark to the field, and it's your responsibility to remove it. All I have personally at stake is that I recently wrote a book that emphasizes priming research as a new approach to the study of associative memory. Count me as a general believer. My reason for writing this letter is that I see a train wreck looming, which is basically what happened anyway. So, close the quote. Another example of the outright fabrication of data is the massive fraud case at a Dutch university. Actually, it happened in a number of them. In 2011, because two PhD students of prominent Tilburg University researcher Dirk Stapper, I probably butchered that name, sorry, realized that their supervisor's results were amazing and all, but they had never seen him collect any data for this, which I think is quite interesting. And we have to recognise that these two people, who were mere PhD students, so they weren't even into academia, like really, and they had their entire careers ahead of them, they had the balls to go over their supervisor's head to upper university level management to reveal their suspicions. Like, they could have been silenced, kicked off their PhD program, and they could have been blackballed so they never work in psychology research again. So I've got a lot of respect for them. After an investigation by the university, it turned out that the researcher, for the name I can't pronounce, has made up data for at least 30 of his studies, and these were the papers that made him famous. And now we understand why ethics are so badly needed. Let's look at how we actually regulate ethics, because come on, they are seriously needed after these horrific studies. So I really hope that you enjoyed today's episode and you got something out of it. I know that I did because, I mean, even though when I wrote this book, ethics was like quite new. I done a lot of like reading and other bits and pieces in it, but because I never had to think about ethics before, and I've never had to do an ethics application, I wasn't really like focused too much on it. But now I am doing it. A lot of this is starting to fall into place, and ethics is definitely nowhere near as scary as I previously thought. So this book, it's a lot of fun. It's a lot of interesting stuff. And you basically see a side of academia or at least psychology research that we don't really give too much a thought to, which is normally good, but we do miss out on some quite interesting information. So if you know someone who will enjoy today's episode, then please share it with them. I'm always really grateful when you wonderful people help spread the word about the podcast. And if you want to learn more, definitely check out Ethics in Psychology, available in all of the usual places. And if you wanted to become a patron of the show, then definitely check out patreon.com/the Psychology World Podcast. And if you're feeling really generous, you can buy me a coffee at buymeacoffee.com/Connor Whiteley, because I've been re-recording this podcast episode drinking some really horrible Spanish coffee that my parents have brought me back from my holiday from their hotel rooms. I love Spain, I love mainland Europe, but this hotel coffee is horrific. So have a great day, everyone, and I'll see you next time. Thanks for listening today. I hope you found it helpful. Please remember to like the video and subscribe to the YouTube channel and follow the podcast on your favourite podcast app. And if you wanted to learn more, then please check out the backlist of the podcast episodes or my books at conwhiteley.net. So have a great day, and I'll see you next time.